Well, good morning, everyone. I am John Mann, Director of Education for Lakeside, and it's Monday, which means it's a new theme week. So the theme for this week is local food sourcing, and we're fortunate to have Brad Schwann joining us today. Brad attended Bowling Green State University, where he earned his bachelor's and master's in education, and he taught for Eastern Arizona College, Arizona State University. Brad has been a business owner in the Port Clinton area and has owned Schwann Orchard since 2005, and he also sits on a number of local boards. And today's presentation is History of the Catawba Island Peach Industry. Not long after Ohio was a wilderness, Catawba Island became one of the centers of the American peach industry. Its location, protruding into Lake Erie, and the great soils found here produced or combined to produce peaches that became famous from Ohio to the East Coast. And I do ask if you would please mute your cell phone ringers and help me in welcoming Brad Schwann.
Thanks, John. First of all, logistics, you can all hear me? Yes. With your permission, even though I'm very short, I don't want to use a podium or a stand. I'm a pacer and a talker, so bear with me. That helps to keep you awake, too. Thanks for having me. Let's do some groundwork first. I'm not a techie guy. John said, do you need, whatever they call that stuff, PowerPoint and all that. Nah, I got some pictures and things on paper. So afterwards, I'll hang around to answer your questions and things, and you're free to come up and look at my pictures of old-time peach harvesting and things. I will try to save a lot of time at the end for a lot of questions and answers, because maybe some of you are here just for that specific reason. You have a problem with a peach tree or something, and you want to know what to do about it, or your neighbor gives you peaches, but they're always wormy, or who knows. But if you have any questions at the end, I will try to save some time. The talk I've got was originally geared more for Catawba Island. I hope that's of interest to you. It's not specifically, although Danbury and this area was very highly populated in peach trees too. Don't get me wrong, but I'm geared towards Catawba and its history and how it came about. So with that being said, how many of you have ever grown a peach tree? Raise your hand. Of you that raised your hands, how many of you had a pleasant experience with that? We got about 50%. That's probably about accurate. How many of you in here have ever eaten a peach? How many of you in here have ever eaten a store-bought peach? How many of you in here have ever bought a roadside or fresh stand peach? A little bit different, aren't they? How many of you preferred the roadside or fresh peach? Yeah, okay. I'll probably, that's one of the things we might get into is what makes the difference between a grocery store peach and a locally grown peach. But I digress. The information I'm going to provide you with is things that I've gathered over the last 20 years when I became a Catawba resident. When we moved to our present location, there was not a peach tree on it. I didn't know anything about peaches. I didn't know anything about Catawba, but I took it upon myself to learn the history of Catawba, and now I'm kind of the peach whisperer of Catawba. It's a fabulous and fascinating history of which I will hit upon a little bit today, but I have to tell you that a lot of this is not documented. A lot of this has come down through word of mouth, and you know what happens there. So you may find fault or errors in a few of the things that I say, and that's to be expected, because a lot of it, when you talk about things that happened in the mid-1800s that wasn't documented, it probably took on a life of its own in a lot of cases. So with that being said, so Catawba Island, probably this whole area, now to think of it, started to get populated in around 1836. A lot of it was sprung up because of the firelands. Are you all familiar with the firelands? You know that a lot of our communities around here are named after Connecticut communities because they were burned out at the tail end of the Revolutionary War. And for the first and only time, I believe, in the government history, they petitioned the government and said, all our stuff is all burned up. What are you going to do about it? And the government said, well, we can send you over to some swampy area. I mean, some beautiful area over in the western part of the world, which is like in Ohio, and they gave them land around there, and it was called the Firelands. A lot of those people started to migrate to this area. It was a very rugged, swampy, rocky, tree-covered area, but free land. It took a lot of years for them to start to come out here after the Firelands Act because there was a lot of dispute about what land they were going to be actually given. And by the time the dispute was figured out, the people that got it, they were dead and gone, and so they gave those rights to their kids. And anyway, so in the early 1830s, 1835, 1836, 1837, they started to come to I'll specifically talk about Catawba, but you can say that it's probably true of Lakeside, Danbury as well, to some extent. They started to come here, and if you were going to move to a new area in the mid-1800s, how were you going to survive? Oh, this is interactive, by the way. You can shout out anytime you have something. You can shout something out. How did they survive? They grew their own stuff, right? They were all farmers. Everybody was a farmer because you didn't have supermarkets and things, so you had to grow either enough to sustain your family or enough to sell to somebody who could sustain your family. So they came to Catawba, and they thought, well, I can put in some corn and some wheat and some oats and stuff. I'll get some chickens and I'll get some cows. The chickens and cows are no problem, but if you know Catawba, you know that putting in rows of corn and things is tough. Because if I stand right here on my property and other places in Catawba, I could have 20 feet of dirt right here. And I could drill down 20 feet, 30, 40 feet, put in a well, whatever. But I step right here, and there's rock that comes all the way up to the surface. And it's hard to put in a row crop when every 20 or 30 feet you run into something that you can't put a plow through. So, let's see, what are we going to grow that doesn't have to be in these long rows so that we can work with it? Oh, I know. Especially since there were a lot of Germans that came to the area, and they had a winemaking background. They all knew how to make wine, but at that time, there was a grape that was taken over the country beyond belief, and it was called the Catawba grape. And there was a gentleman in Cincinnati who discovered a grape native to America that grew along the Catawba River in South Carolina or North Carolina. And he got a hold of it. He was either a lawyer or a banker. The records are pretty tough on that. But he became a guru for Catawba grapes. He propagated them. He took them back to Cincinnati. He propagated them. He worked with them. He grew them. He expanded them. He played around with Catawba wine, and he created a sparkling Catawba wine, which was taking over the nation. So these early farmers, they said, well, we'll just grow a lot of grapes because we used to grow grapes anyway and make our own wine, but we'll grow grapes and we'll sell those and use that money to buy our goods. This fellow's name was Longworth. Nicholas Longworth. And in 1800, it was North Carolina, by the way. What they did is they made it almost like a champagne, and it became so popular that Henry Longworth, I always get the Longfellow, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. You've heard of him. I had. Yeah. He wrote like a 4-page poem about Ode to Catawba Grapes. You can look it up on the internet. I'll read you just a little portion of it. Or later on, you can come up and read the whole thing. I won't bore you with the whole thing. It's hard to read because it was, mid-1800s stuff. It's verse after verse after verse, but very good in its way is the Verzenay, or the Sillery, soft and creamy, but Catawba wine has a taste more divine, more dulcet, delicious, and dreamy. He was a genius in marketing, okay, this Nicholas Longworth. And it became so popular that they were exporting sparkling Catawba wine to as far as Europe. I mean, it was going to the East Coast, I'd say the West Coast, but there was no West Coast at the time. It became so popular that it was competing with champagne. Now, you all think champagne's been around for a gazillion years, but it wasn't. Actually, champagne didn't come around until around 1800. Well, shortly before 1800. I mean, today we think of it as being the champagne of bottled champagne, or beer, as the case may be. In 1800, there were only 300,000 bottles of champagne produced in 1800. So this, in the 1830s, and this guy got going on Catawba grapes. So it became very popular. They all decided they'd put in grapes, in particular a Catawba grape, which is native to America only, by the way. It's one of the, I think, 3 grapes that are native to to America. And within years, it took off so big that Catawba Island produced 1 million pounds of grapes. There were 71 wineries within a wagon's haul from Catawba Island. 71 wineries. There were 3 in Catawba. There were 12 on Kelly's Island. And there were 47 wineries in Sandusky. And the reason for that being that it's so much easier to ship bottles than to ship fresh grapes. So wherever the grapes are grown, that's where the wineries sprung up. So Catawba went crazy on grapes. They were going bonkers, you know, and all these guys and gals, they were doing great. They were selling their grapes. In fact, Catawba Island was called something like Van Schlesler Township. But in 1863, 2 of the grape growers, Walter Smith and Ira Dutcher, knocked door to door on all the people that lived in Catawba, petitioning to get the name changed to Catawba Island Township. And in fact, they were successful. In 1863, the name was changed from Van Schlesler, or whatever it was, to Catawba Island Township. And the vote I have here someplace. The vote was 34 yeas and 14 nays. There were 48 people that voted on that issue, and so it passed. It was overwhelmingly successfully called Catawba Island. The problem was that 3 years before that, the grape industry started to decline in Catawba. Little did they know that there was a black rot and powdery mildew was going through the grapevines. And every year they were getting less and less. Although they had produced 1 million pounds of grapes, they were actually having some issues with it. So calling it Catawba Island Township was interesting, but it gets even better because in 1870, 7 years after it became Catawba Island Township, they diverted the Portage River so that it didn't cut off Catawba Island, and it was no longer technically an island. So now they just got it changed to Catawba for the grape, and island for an island, and it's no longer big on Catawba, and it's no longer even an island. But to this day, it's Catawba Island Township. It's sexy, except when you tell people that you live on Catawba Island, and they say, "Well, do you take a ferry, or how do you get there?" You know, you really only have to go over probably some stones that were filled in, so they started getting desperate. They started thinking, well, what are we going to do? Because we've got this blight that's going through the grapes. What are we going to do? Martha, what are we going to do? You know, and a gentleman named James Gamble came on the scene in 1869, and he told all his buddies, they were probably sitting around a pickle barrel, and he says, you know what? I'm going to plant me some peach trees. And there are records of his neighbors all saying, you're nuts. This is wine country. And he said, oh, no. Well, it wasn't such a big gamble after all, actually, because James Gamble, before the Civil War in 1861, would have harvested his first ever peach crop in Hamilton County, Ohio. He had a peach orchard in Hamilton County, Ohio, except that the Civil War broke out. He immediately enlisted. He went into, and here's one of those debatable things, was he in the 1st Ohio Volunteer Army or the 15th? 2nd or the 15th? There are reports on both. But I will tell you that when he went into the Army, if he was in the 15th, in the first couple months he would have been in the Battle of Stones River. A couple months later he would have been in the Battle of Chickamauga. And a couple months later he would have been in the siege of Atlanta, and then with Sherman on his march to the ocean. Those were extremely bloody, terrible battles. He's fortunate that he survived them. Catawba Island is fortunate he survived them. In the first of those battles, there were 41,000 men involved, and there were 13,000 casualties out of 41,000. In the second battle, there were 58,000 men involved and 16,000 casualties. And a lot of there's two main reasons for this. One is warfare at the time was real simple. You all got in a big old line like this, and you all just started marching towards the other enemy. And they'd pick you off until you just keep marching, you know. Right, I'm with you, nodding your head like, what were they thinking? It gets even worse and bloodier because by then, early on in the Civil War, the North had evolved a weapon. No longer were they smoothbore rifles with a ball that would travel kind of like a knuckleball and be relatively inaccurate so that you couldn't plunk off these people that are marching in formation towards you. They had the first rifled barrels and mini balls, they called them. It was an elongated, instead of a ball, it was an elongated shell that would spin as it went, and it was much, much, much more accurate. They say that they could be accurate for 300 to 400 yards. And the Confederates didn't have that technology yet. So that was a technology that really benefited the North. And it was pretty deadly. He survived it all. The story has it that he ended his career in the Army being a guard at Johnson's Island at the prisoner of war camp. And that's probably what brought him to Catawba, because in 1865 he mustered out and he came to Catawba. There's a really good likelihood that that's because he was right here at Johnson's Island and was looking for some land, and he found it. And he was into grapes too at the beginning. But a couple years later, he saw the writing on the wall, went to peaches. The rest is kind of history, because as the grapes were going down, peaches were coming up. They found a great market for peaches. You could sell, and apples, for instance. James Gamble kept some of his apple trees. You could get, at the time, you could get 30 to 35 cents for a bushel of apples. But you could get $1 to $2.50 for a bushel of peaches. So, in fact, the story has it that if you had a very good year in the peach industry, you could pay for the entire land you bought and the house that was on it in one season's. Yeah. So can you imagine that it kind of exploded in terms of switching over? They started planting peach trees in between the grape crop. And it took off so by 1879, 10 years later, there were 52 growers that had greater than 50 bushels of production. You got to know that once you plant a peach tree, for me, if I plant a peach tree, it takes about 3 to 4 years before it really becomes productive. In those days, they were planting probably little 12 and 18-inch trees, which probably took about 5 years to start producing, or 6 years. So it was a lengthy process to get there, but they got there. Let's see. 1889, William Miller planted 1,900 Alberta peaches. How many of you have ever heard of Alberta peach? How many of you can name more than 3 varieties of peach? How many of you can name, and don't shout it out because I know what the answer is, how many of you can name one variety of peach? Let me think. I'm going to do my oh, I'm thinking of a peach, I'm thinking of a peach. These people have raised their hands. I know, it came to me, the Red Haven. Am I right? Yeah, you've all heard of Red Haven. Red Haven is a very good peach. It came around in 1940. Dr. Johnson developed that peach in Michigan and sold it to the farm. I digress or foregress here. I'm all the way up to 1940, and I didn't want to be there yet. But there are actually over 400 varieties of peaches. I personally grow 21 varieties myself. I have 320 trees. I grow 21 different varieties. And the reason for that isn't because taste. In apples, when you get a different variety, it tastes different. You know? They all taste different. In peaches, they all taste the same. But when you harvest from a peach tree, you can only harvest from that tree for 5 or 6, 7 days, and it's done. Every peach will be off that tree at least within 10 days. So, and it comes in the same time every year. So in order for me to be open, or anybody to be open all year long, all summer long, you have people that have developed varieties that come in a week earlier, a week earlier, a week earlier, or a week later, and later, and later, and later. And I'll get to how that happened, but the Alberta peach was particularly a popular peach. It was found, Clara Rumpf came up with the first Alberta peach. She got like 500 peach trees from her father. They were in Macon, Georgia. She got like 500 trees because he was a peach grower too, and she planted them all. And one tree, for whatever reason, nature changed it, this much, and it seemed to be sweeter, it seemed to be juicier, and it seemed to be more firm. And that was the key to it, because in the early days, 90%, 95% of all peaches were raised to go to somebody to can. You can eat while you're canning, but the bottom line is you want bushels of these things to put in glass ball jars and line the shelves so you have fruit all winter long. Almost all peaches were for canning. Alberta was particularly firm. It would can well. You want a completely ripe peach to can, and if you get one of my peaches today, a completely ripe peach, we call them leaners. You have to lean over the sink because it's going to squirt everywhere. But it wouldn't be a great canning peach because they're not firm enough. You process that, you put it in a ball jar, you get it out 6 months later, and it's like peach mush. All right, so you want a peach that's going to be nice and firm. I canned peaches today. If heaven forbid you've ever had a canned peach, but you can almost cut through them with your fork, right? I mean, they're firm. At least they're not mush. So the Alberta peach took over. In fact, in 1875, Clara Rumpf came up, found this tree, and her husband helped propagate that one tree into many thousands of trees. And to do that, you just cut a limb. You cut hundreds of limbs, and you splice them onto rootstock of anything else, and it grows up being that exact same peach. So it became very popular. And being as smart as he was, Mr. Rumpf named the peach Alberta because Clara Rumpf's name was Clara Alberta Rumpf. So they named it the Alberta Rumpf. He was a wise man. In fact, he was so wise that he became popular for two other things rather than the Alberta peach. He became most popular for two inventions. One was the ice dolly, which was a big tank that had ice in it, not a tank, like a big drawer, and was on wheels, casters. And on top of that, you could stack crates of peaches so that when you rolled it up into a train car, it would be refrigerated. Remember, this is before refrigeration, right? I mean, we're all used to refrigeration, but there was no refrigeration. So they could ship our peaches, or anybody could ship peaches or other foods anywhere in the country, the ones that had to stay cool. So he invented the ice dolly. He also invented the ice train. He had these big dollies that were full of ice. only they were mammoth, and you could roll them up into a train and fill the whole end of the train with ice so that they could transport, that would refrigerate, that it would be a refrigerated train car. And he became very famous for that because there's a lot of things that need to be shipped and be kept cold. And when you think about it, I mean, we're so used to everything just being shipped overnight, and so he became popular for those two things. In fact, James Gamble in 1875 ripped out all his trees and planted all Alberta. But by then, his trees were 69, this is, oh no, I'm sorry, by 1980 he ripped them all out and went to Alberta. Anyway, a peach tree only lives to be 12, 14 years old, and it's going to be, that's its life expectancy. So he wasn't doing anything big. So by 1891, Catawba Island produced 200,000 bushel of peaches. By now it gets serious, 1898, Catawba Island had 300,000 trees, peach trees, and 400,000 bushel of peaches. That was 1898. It gets really serious now. Now everybody's 1900, 600,000 peach trees, 700,000 bushel of peaches. And by the early 1900s, about 1913, 1915, Catawba Island alone produced 1 million bushel of peaches a year. Now, I'm going to put that into perspective. Oh, by the way, there were probably over 100 orchards at the time, just in Catawba Island. Now, Danbury had their orchards, Oak Harbor had some orchards. Catawba Island is particularly good for peach growing for several reasons. One is there's a lot of limestone in the soil, and that makes for a very sweet crop, very good growing conditions. But probably as important is the fact that, and you can put this in your notes, Catawba Island is surrounded by exactly 72.42 bazillion gallons of warm water of Lake Erie. So it keeps us moderate in temperatures. In fact, those of you who are growers or master gardeners or whatever, you're going to see that you have all these lines of different zones. The little Catawba is a zone all to itself. It's different just because it's surrounded completely with water. So, so it was a mecca. But to put it in perspective, so 600,000 trees, the largest orchard in Catawba now, there were over 100 orchards then. The largest Catawba orchard right now is Dave Howell on East Catawba Road, and Dave has 700 trees. And they had, in 1900, well, by 1915, it was probably closer to 800,000 trees. Really? Dave Howell, with his 700 trees, I have 320 trees. But there's me, Dave Howell, and Quinstock orchards. There's 3 left. At one time, there were over 100. But 600,000 trees, 1 million bushel. And Dave Howell, on his 700 trees, his best year ever was 1,000 bushels. 1,000 bushels in the largest orchard that is there today. And if you add mine and you add Quinstock, you probably have 2,000 bushels a year off of Catawba now. And they were pulling off 1 million bushel of peaches. So at the early time, they liked Alberta peach because it would can. They also liked it because they could concentrate, they could focus their season on 10 days a year. And most of them had also joined the most popular vocation, which was fishing. Port Clinton and Catawba were the largest freshwater ports in America. And in 1913, there were 8 fish companies in Port Clinton, there were 2 in Catawba, and they harvested 14 million pounds of fish. And so these farmers, they would go out in the boats, they'd help pull nets all day, or sort fish, or cut fish, or whatever they did, and then they could go for that. They could tend to their trees a little bit in the evenings, but then during that 2 weeks of Alberta, they could pick like crazy and send them all off to be canned someplace. But things then started to change. The population base started to grow. In 1907, the Celotex company came in. A lot of people moved into the area. In 1890, the Matthews Boat Company started. In 1918, Erie Army Depot came in, and United States Gypsum Company. So we were starting to really grow. Now there's a lot more people looking for fresh peaches to can on their own. And by the time we got to Model Ts and transportation, people could start showing up at your farm and buying, and now we could sell retail. Now I don't have to just sell my Albertas. I could sell peaches to people who come and want to buy 2 bushels at a time, or to somebody that actually drove here from Cleveland or Toledo or Detroit or someplace who wants to buy 100 bushel. Later on, if anybody has any time, I have a lot of pictures of wagon loads in downtown Port Clinton where they're being bartered off, or maybe I'll show you later. So now they're looking for, how can I extend my season, because there's all these people coming to my stand, to my farm to buy peaches, and all I have is Alberta. Well, I need, as I said, varieties. We need more varieties. Well, there was no incentive to create new varieties of peaches. At the time, there was probably 15 or 20 varieties, of which they liked Alberta because it was nice and firm. But now we got people coming, and they want to eat a lot of fresh peaches too. So firm isn't all that as important. So we want some nice, soft eating peaches. And what helped that a lot is in 1930, 3 gentlemen went to Congress and said, we think you should be able to patent a plant. Until 1930, you could not get a patent on any plant. You could not have the most beautiful orchid or rose in the world and get a patent on it and say, this is the Betty's Beauty or something. You couldn't get a patent on it. Somebody else could just steal it. I mean, not steal it, but get a clipping of it or produce it. 3 gentlemen, of which maybe you've heard of a couple of them. Luther Burbank. Anybody remember him from high school science? Luther Burbank was a genius in terms of propagating plants. He came up with so many different flowers and so many different foods. He was a genius. He wanted some protection so he could actually make a royalty on all these inventions. The other one was Paul Stark. Paul Stark, even to this day, Stark Brothers Nurseries is one of the largest nursery supplier in America, maybe in the world. They sell hundreds of thousands of trees, maybe even millions of trees a year to farmers and individuals. If you're getting trees even from Walmart or something, sometimes you're getting them from the Stark brothers. He thought you should be able to patent them because he actually was in cahoots with Luther Burbank. He funded Luther Burbank to come up with some new stuff. And the third one you may have heard of, his name was Thomas Edison. And you heard of Thomas Edison? He was one of the 3 people that went to Congress and lobbied and said, we should be able to patent these things. And so in 1930, the Plant Protection Act came into play. And they said, if you can create a unique plant, you can't just go out and find one. I can't go say, I found this dandelion, I want to patent it or something. You couldn't just find it in nature. You had to be able to prove that you created this new variety of something, and you had to be able to recreate it asexually. In other words, you couldn't just have a bee go over and make a new one. You had to be able to probably make cuttings and root them so that you would get the exact same variety. If you plant a peach pit, you can do that. You can get it to grow. There's at least a 50% chance that that tree will not be the same exact variety as what you ate. Nature tries to take it back to what it was before it got to where it is. In fact, that's how the Alberta came out and all the other ones. They plant 10,000 trees, and they look for a couple trees that blossom a week earlier than anything else. And then they cut those and make those into 1,000 trees and watch those for the ones that bear fruit a week before that. and they keep the process going. That's how we come up with all these different varieties. Or they find one that the peaches are a little bit bigger, and they propagate those. Or in the case of Red Haven, for those that, ooh, I did that. In the case of Red Haven, the reason you all know Red Haven isn't because it's the best peach in the world. I'm sorry to pop your bubble, but Red Haven is not the best peach in the world. Here's what happened. Great-grandma was looking for the very first kind of freestone peach. And she found this peach called Red Haven. And she said, well, if I'm going to can 8 bushel, I want something that's going to come off the pit. And Red Haven is the first one in the season that typically will come off the pit. But here's another piece of information. Red Haven is not a freestone peach, which means it'll come clean off the pit. It is semi-freestone. Sometimes it comes off, sometimes it doesn't. The interesting thing is, Dr. Johnson, who developed the tree, and the growers who put them in, didn't promote that. They didn't create that to be the first freestone peach. They created it to be the first red-skin peach. Peaches at the time were like 80% yellow and 20% red, a blush of red. And Dr. Johnson said, you know what? I need to keep coming up with redder and redder and redder and redder. And the reason for that is not trickery, but at least marketing. At the time, when you picked a peach, if you picked a peach early so that it stayed really firm, it would not only be yellow, but it would be green. Okay? And it's not going to be quite as good if you pick it while it's still green. So they couldn't pick it when they wanted to pick it because they wanted it to be extra firm so they could ship it. In addition, it shows bruises. If the peach is all yellow and you bruise it, those bruises show up. But if that peach is 100% red, you can't hardly tell if it's bruised. I mean, my wife and I go through 5,000 peaches a day looking for anything that's bruised, and it's hard to see them when you get a completely red peach. So that's why that peach was developed. But great-grandma, she said, well, it's the first one that's coming off. And they're good peaches. Don't get me wrong. They're very good, usually very good peach. Another tangent. What makes a really good peach is drought. What makes a really good peach is drought. This is probably the best year for peaches in my 20 years of growing peaches because in Catawba we've had very, very little rain. And people, it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? You think, wow, you should want a lot of water and stuff. Here's my example that I give to you. Did you ever cut into a cantaloupe that looks beautiful, smells beautiful, cuts beautifully, and you taste it, and you can't even taste cantaloupe? It's like water. It has nothing to do with the grower, the variety, the ground it was in. It just means that it rained for 4 or 5 straight days before they picked that cantaloupe. And in those 4 or 5 days, that cantaloupe doubled in size with all this water. And it's just full of water. And that's true not only of cantaloupe. That's an example I can give you because we can all relate to that. But that's also true of peaches. They will swell up with water. They'll be the bigger peach. And you can be proud you got all these big peaches, but what made them big? A lot of water. It's also true of strawberries. If you have a lot of water, strawberries are not as tasty. If they're smaller, you ever notice that? The smaller ones, like, whoa, now that's a strawberry. Right? Grapes, when they tell you that it was such a great year for a vintage for some wine, probably a drought because the grapes are much smaller, but all those flavors are concentrated in that little thing. Tomatoes. How many of you have a tomatoes in your garden? What happens if it's been dry and then all of a sudden rains? Do you notice? The tomatoes will soak up so much water, they'll burst. Have you ever had a burst tomato in your? I do all the time. The cracked tomatoes, it's because the skin's kind of tough and it sucks up a lot of water and it just busts at the seams. Anyway, so Red Haven isn't necessarily the best, but it was the first reliably good, big, red trickery peach available. So great-grandma got them, and she taught her daughter, we're going to can peaches as soon as Red Haven come. And she taught her daughter, we're going to can peaches as soon as Red Haven come. And at our stand, well, There are over 400 varieties of peaches. Now that they can be patented, they were able, when I buy a peach tree, $1.50 of every peach tree I buy goes to the person who invented that peach variety. And that doesn't seem like much, but they'll sell over 1 million trees of that variety every year. So that guy, he made some cash. But it helped me now, because it helped these guys, because now they have people coming to their farm all day, all summer long, and they can get retail prices instead of wholesale prices. So they started getting different varieties, and frankly, the Alberta has almost completely faded out because there's no longer a need for an extra firm peach. So if you're wondering about Alberta, that's what happened. All right, so we build up to a million bushel of peaches. What happened? Here's what happened, and I got this from a local farmer, a peach orchardist. What year was that? In 1945, New Departure. A lot of you locals, do you remember New Departure in Sandusky? New Departure is a big manufacturing plant. They made ball bearings. In 1945, they announced that they were going to open a plant in Sandusky. At the time, their plants were all on the East Coast. So slowly, executives from the New Departure plant from there were being transferred to here. This plant was going to employ 4,000 employees, but more importantly, several hundred executives that had to move from the East Coast, where they paid a lot of money for the houses on the East Coast. And they came to Hicksville, the Firelands, Sandusky, and their pockets were bulging with money. We got to find a new place. Where should we go? Well, let's live on the lake. So word got out that the farmers in Catawba, who were by 1945, were in their upper 70s, mid 80s, and they had gone to their kids and they said, Joey and Martha, would you like to take over the orchard? And they go, no. It's not what it used to be, because the price of peaches had come down, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And you got to remember that one out of every 5 or 6 years, they were losing the entire crop to a frost. One day of frost you lose the whole year. I lost, it's probably been 9 or 10 years ago, 5 minutes of hail, I lost 80% of my crop. It was like the last day of June. We had picked peaches the day before for the earliest we had picked at the time, and we got 5 minutes of hail, and it destroyed everything. Almost everything. The guy a mile down the street got it worse. Bob Schride, he lost his entire crop. So the kids said, no, we can go over and work at New Departure. We can work in the fishing industry. We can work at Erie Army Depot. We can make a lot of money in manufacturing. I tell you what, Mom and Dad, you sell the property, and that way you'll just leave us the money and not the land. They may not have said it that way, but that's what they... So the farmer said, the word was getting out that these farmers were willing to sell their land in Catawba, which is right on Lake Erie. And so the price went from here to here. The farmers were able to sell their land for probably 10 times what they paid for it. And that continues today, by the way. The last orchard that went out was Bob Schride's farm, about a mile north of where I am. I'm on Northwest Catawba Road. Bob Schride passed away about 7-8 years ago now. His orchard is now in development. And I'm telling you this so you can get in on the ground floor, because they haven't sold a lot yet, but it's going to be a gated community. If you're familiar with Northwest Road, they build a nice mound there so it'll be blocked from the view. You won't have to hear the traffic. And it's got a nice little pond and everything. They've got the plumbing and stuff in. There isn't a house on it yet, though. But if you'd like to buy a lot, here's your chance. 1 1/4 acres, $500,000 for 1 1/4 acre lot. So how many of you, your realtor here could probably sell you one. You all interested in that? You got to sell a hell of a lot of peaches to pay for $500,000 per acre. So that's what they were thinking. You're going to give me $400 for an acre? Hell yes. So it got sold off. those 100 orchards, maybe 150 orchards that once were there, are down to 3. I think I told you about that. In 1947, there was another death blow to the local peaches. The General Agreement on Trade and Tariff Act was signed. Right after World War II, America had become an industrial complex. And we were the China of the day. I mean, we could supply every nation in the world with anything they needed. We made it here, and we made it good, and we made it fast, and we made it cheap, but there were tariffs on all sorts of stuff during the war. So in 1947, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariff Act was signed, and that took tariffs off of things that we had on things, including peaches. There was a tariff on imported peaches until 1947. And then we said, well, we'll take the tariffs off because we don't want them to put tariffs on our stuff. So we'll take it off of their stuff. But that flooded the market. From China and Greece flooded America with canned peaches. I mean, now they were truly canned by that time. Now they weren't. Canned wasn't a euphemism for bottled. So they flooded the market. The price of peaches went down. The price of land went way up. It was the perfect storm. I've covered, probably put half of you to sleep. I'll show you a couple things I have here. If you get a chance in a bit, I laid out some postcard pictures of downtown Port Clinton where hundreds and hundreds of horse-drawn wagons would go daily and barter off their peaches. I have posters here. This is downtown Port Clinton where wagons would go in every day, loaded up with peaches. Here's the Island House and McCarthy's Restaurant if you ever get into Port Clinton, so you can get a perspective where they are. The buyers would come in from Cleveland, Detroit, Toledo, Columbus, who knows, to buy Catawba peaches. This is the foot of the Jefferson Street where the steamers would come in every day, and you can see them being loaded up with Catawba and Danbury peaches. This is Gibson, Ohio, where there was a train depot there, and over 20 train cars a day left here full of Catawba peaches to go to New York and New Jersey. 20 train cars a day. In fact, there's stories of people lining. They'd put a sign up at the Waldorf or some hotel in New York that said, Catawba peaches coming today. And there would be lines of people a couple blocks long to buy Catawba peaches. And this is a basket factory that was in Port Clinton. There's about, I don't know, 30 or 40 women lined up here for this photograph, along with their ware. They wove up to 1 million bushel baskets per year. Bushel and half bushel and pack. And the logs would come in at the end of the road on the river and then roll them up the street. This is kitty corner from where Wendy's is today. There's an empty lot, and then there's a building that has a mural on the side of it. That block right there was this basket factory. And there were like 3 basket factories in the area. There was one in Port Clinton, there was one in Oak Harbor, there was one in Elmore. It was big business, which, by the way, a basket, there's articles here by growers that said in the early days, it cost them 8 cents a piece for a bushel basket. And that was really eating into their profit. And there's one here that says the farmers, one year they had a bumper crop, and they were going to have to buy lids. They used to put nets over them. But this year they had to stack the bushel baskets so high that they had to buy wooden lids for their bushel baskets. And those lids were going to cost them 2.5 cents a piece. And they didn't know if there was enough profit margin in it to continue, because they were going to have 10.5 cents into the bushel baskets. There was also fruit companies. There was a canning company in Port Clinton. There was a fruit company in Catawba, just about where the ferry line is. In fact, here is a dock that was built so that the steamers could come in and they could directly market their peaches to Detroit, Toledo, and Cleveland. Who built that dock? His name was Miller. Mr. Miller built a dock at the point of Catawba Yeah, they rang a bell with you. Some of you didn't. There wasn't any ferry system over to South Bass Island, but there was a dock that was built so that the steamers could come in, and Mr. Miller, who happened to have one of the largest orchards in the whole area, could direct market his peaches to those places. And I assume it more. This is about 50 yards west of the current dock. In fact, if you look, there's a parking lot up there to the west of the current, and I think you can see some of the remains of this dock. And at the top of that hill was the Catawba Island Fruit Company. Really big operation. What they would do is the farmers, if they didn't want to deal with maybe a great portion of their peaches, they would sell to the fruit companies. The fruit companies say, all right, I'll give you X amount per bushel this week. And then they would sort them, and they would pack them, and they would market them, and they would deliver them. So it got the farmer, he didn't have to deal with all that. But it certainly cut into his profits, don't get me wrong. But there was I have pictures of a fruit sorting factory in Port Clinton, and there was the fruit company in Catawba. There were multiple basket companies. There was a lot of industry that circled around the peach industry. Trying to think if there's anything. I couldn't have forgotten anything because I just said about everything. How about some questions? Interaction here. Yes?
Could you please re-explain how Catawba Island, you said the Portage River was?
The Portage River actually was diverted. It didn't used to be where it is today. It cut off Catawba, made Catawba an island. They had a bridge over, maybe only 20 feet, but part of the Portage River, I don't know if there were more than one part of Portage River or not, but part of it, they had to go over a bridge. And then, don't ask me how they diverted it. I have no idea. I know on Perry Street in Port Clinton, it used to be like 100 feet closer to those houses too, instead of where it's at now. Their front yard, all that property that's north of Perry Street was cut off by the Portage River. So I don't know exactly how they did it, but they did it. And I don't know why they did it, but they did it. So it's not technically an island anymore. Give me some, yes?
It was fascinating to hear about the history of the peaches on the island. But when we first visited this area in 1974, there was a cherry orchard at the bend of West Catawba Island. I don't know when the cherry orchard ceased to exist. It's where Gideon Owen has their the winery or the vineyard at that point, just before you make the bend. So I was wondering, is there a similar history for cherry orchards, or why are cherries not particularly good here? They grow more in Michigan.
That's an interesting question. I don't think there's a real history of cherry growing other than every farmer grew a little bit of everything, and probably some of them grew more of some things that they fell in love with. There were a lot of apples, but I gave you the example on the prices of apples. 33. By the way, the peaches that they got, they could get it. Oh, wow, I did leave something out. Have you all got another 5 minutes? I almost forgot one of the coolest things. To answer your question, I don't think there's a true history for cherries, more so than anything else. They all had a little bit of everything because they were all, the farmers back then. You had a little bit of everything. You had some chickens, you had some cows, you had some apple trees. You tried to have some potatoes. You tried to have a little of everything. But I don't think that there's much. In terms of what will grow here, I mentioned that there's 400 varieties of peaches. There are peaches in Georgia that will not grow here, and there are peaches that will grow here that will not grow in Georgia. By the way, Georgia is really no longer the capital of the world. It's really moved to South Carolina. South Carolina is now producing more peaches than Georgia. Georgia is slowly moving into blueberries. Georgia will, before you know it, Georgia will become the blueberry state. They'll still have their license plate that says, the peach state, but they are really moving into blueberries. The thing with peaches is every peach has what's called chill hours. every peach tree variety has been rated on how many hours it takes before nature says, okay, you can have a new crop. Most of the trees that I grow are somewhere up around 600 or 800 chill hours. That means there has to be 600 to 700, 800 hours below 35 to 40 degrees, or that tree will not realize that it went through a winter and can start producing peaches again. If I got one, so in Georgia, if you had one that have 800 chill hours, that tree would not produce peaches. That's why you don't see peaches in Texas, very few peaches in Texas or Florida, or the very warm states, because they haven't developed a good quality peach that has like 0 chill hours. They all, depending on the peach, there are zones that they'll grow in based on how many hours that takes to trick that tree into knowing that it's gone through winter and it can start producing again. So I just find this fascinating. I hope you do too. This James Gamble, who was the father of Catawba peaches, wrote an article for the Rural New Yorker in, I think it was 2009. He was like in his 70s by then. And I have a copy of the article. Bear with me, it's a little bit lengthy. I'm going to read through 2 pages. But it gives you an insight into what it was like to be a farmer in the late 1800s, early 1900s, in particular, James Gamble. I mean, my idol, the guy that started it all. So this is an article he wrote for the Rural New Yorker in, I said 2009, I mean 1909. I had taken advantage of a widely advertised excursion from Cincinnati to Tampa on November 1905 to visit some relatives in Tampa and attend the Florida State Fair at that place. The clerk of the weather was in good humor, no doubt, for we had the entire 3 weeks that I was there the most delightful weather I had ever experienced at that season of the year, and I went back home in love with the climate of Florida. The first thing I said to my wife on reaching home was, "We are going to spend the winter in Florida." "Why, how can we?" she replied. "What will you do with the horse and the cow and that big flock of chickens?" "I don't know," I said, "but we're going, that's sure." And I told her that I heard one man in Tampa say, in speaking of the soil, "white sand." I spoke of it as poor. He replied, "Yes, that's so. 'Tisn't as rich as some of your northern land, but our climate is worth $100 an acre." So I commenced at once to figure it out how we were going to Florida. The result was I chartered a freight car to take our 325 hens and pullets, our cow, and a lot of our furniture from Catawba Island to Tampa, Florida. Now there's a guy that got it. I mean, a lot of us go to Florida too, but I don't think you never thought about taking your cow and your 300 chickens. For this, we paid $126, and an attendant was allowed free passage to go with the car to care for the livestock. The household goods were put in one end of the car, the cow in the other, and the 325 chickens in 24 coops occupied the center, being placed 4 coops long, 2 coops wide, and 3 coops high, which left plenty of room for feeding and watering en route. This car left Gypsum on the Lakeshore Road the night of December 28, 1905, and was hauled via Toledo and Cincinnati, Ohio, Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Jacksonville, Florida, to Tampa, arriving at the latter place on the morning of January 4th, 1906. The car was detained at several transfer stations from 5 to 10 hours each time, or would have made it quicker. The stock, however, came through in excellent condition, the cow giving milk and some of the biddies laying eggs on the way. The remainder of our family started from home January 1 and landed in Jacksonville over the Queen and Crescent Railway January 4th and Tampa that night. We found our young man had arrived that morning and had moved into the house and had cow and chickens on the lots engaged for us by friends. On January 5th, we set to work and soon had sheds, not houses, built for roosts and nests under them for our chickens, enclosing them with wire. The cow we stabled in one corner of the small yard for her to run in. She did not fall off in her milk, but continued to give us a generous supply of good milk during our stay in Tampa. What milk was not used by the family was readily disposed of at 10 cents per quart. We sold the cow for $50 to Major, this is a person's name, Major, an old colored man who owns her yet, and in reply to a proposition to buy her made to him the other day, said, "No, sir, that cow ain't for sale. My old woman won't take no $100 for that cow." After Major bought her, she was taken with the tick fever, but he called in a cow doctor who soon cured her with the aid of the owner, who combed the ticks off and washed the cow with strong soap suds. This is an interesting story to be in a newspaper, I think. She soon recovered and was presented her owner with a heifer calf, which he values almost as much as he does the cow. Both are flourishing in the balmy climate of Florida, wouldn't we all? As to the poultry, they proved to be a veritable gold mine. We fed them with corn and wheat and oats, kept grit and oyster shells by them all the time, and gave them plenty of fresh water 3 times a day. We sold 25, which left us 300. They commenced to lay right away, and soon we were getting from 100 to 150 eggs per day. During the month of February, we often got 12 to 14 dozen a day. At first, we sold eggs for 35 cents a dozen, then 30 cents. And by the last of February, prices fell to 25 cents a dozen. But the result finally footed up like this. The feed for cow and chickens cost us $20 a month. Rent of the house and lots, $20 a month, also $20 a month. And besides the eggs used in the family, we sold enough to pay for food and rent and had nearly $50 left over. Though some of this was for milk sold, probably $15. March 1, we sold the outfit and went back to our delightful summer home on Catawba Island in Lake Erie. We left 3 of our family there. They spent the past summer with us, and now we are back in Tampa to spend the winter with them. I sold off 450 choice hens and pullets before leaving Catawba, this time that being what was left out of nearly 1,000 rocks and Wyandottes. Our peach crop on Catawba Island this year was a bonanza, fruit of all kind being scarce east of us. They had a big freeze that year, and all of Pennsylvania was frozen out, and all of eastern Ohio was all frozen out, so it really helped for the people that grew it around here. Commission men from almost all the large cities east of us came and paid $2 a bushel and up for our peaches, some as high as $4 and even $5 a bushel for every choice large fruit. Catawba Island shipped this season about 100,000 bushel of choice peaches. The key to that, by the way, choice peaches. Those sorting houses and even here, the price difference between $1 a bushel and $5 a bushel, you got to know that the peaches back then, I bet you only 10% were what we would sell today. The rest, I mean, insects had to be horrible because they didn't have the sprays we had, the spraying techniques we had, the cultivation techniques we had. In fact, at one point, San Jose scale, which is a disease, it's an insect that was all over the county, and they were trying to find something that would kill off San Jose scale, and they ended up spraying petroleum oil on the trees. Now, don't think of it as it's more like more like a mineral oil what they were using, but it would smother out the San Jose scale. In fact, there were farms that were forced to do that because it was spreading widely and it was bringing down all the crops. Also, by the way, there was a bounty on blackbirds. You could take a scalp. For every scalp of a blackbird you took to the Ottawa County Commissioners, they would give you 1/2 cent. So you can picture there's a, what do you do for a living? Yeah, I'm a blackbird bounty hunter. I shoot blackbirds all day, and yesterday I made me 42 cents. But so that's some things that attack them. James Gamble died in he died in 1916 of hepatitis. His wife Rose, whom he married on Christmas Eve of, I don't want to go back, many years left. She lived to be another 16 years. When he died, he was the oldest person on Catawba Island. He was 84 years old when he died. He was the oldest person. There had been somebody that was in their 90s, but they died a couple years before him. So with that being said, I'll get back to questions real quick, or if any of you need to leave, just get up and leave. But yes? Apricots are grown in Catawba. In fact, you'll find that Quinstock Orchards probably grows as many apricots as he does peaches. I had apricots for several years, and I gave up on them because the apricots come into blossom about a week or 10 days before a peach does, and I'm already a nervous wreck when we get into blossom. This year we missed a frost by 1 day. I was in blossom for about a week before we had a mild frost. But that was enough time for them to become fertilized. I gave up. I had apricots for 7 or 8 years before, and I never got a single apricot. So if Quentin Smith wants to grow apricots, I'll come back to you. I'm going to get some others first. Yes, back there.
2 questions. Do you have a farm stand at your orchard? And you mentioned that Red Haven is not the best peach. Which variety do you consider the best?
I love the question. Well, I love both questions. Yes, I have a fruit stand on Northwest Catawba Road. We're about 3 miles south of the Catawba Island Club. We're right, if you come up Sand Road, you continue on Sand Road around, we're on Northwest Road. We're the only orchard now on Northwest Road. There's only 3. And there's Dave Howell on East Road. I'm on West Road, and Quinstock is up, really almost up at the top. We could be both. Yeah, we have a stand. By the way, did I tell you I wasn't a farmer by trade? The only thing I ever grew was radishes in my dad's garden. But as a retirement idea, I told my wife we should buy some land so that it wouldn't lose it in the stock market or something. So we bought this acreage in Catawba. It had been a peach orchard in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, but there was a freeze in the 70s that killed every tree in the orchard, of that orchard. Booty Wallers was the gentleman that had the place. And they never replanted. So when I got the place, I said, you know, Diana, this place, Catawba, used to be big on peaches, I think. I had no idea. And so I said, well, I think I'll plant like 20 peach trees. And I planted 20, and then I made it 50, then I made it, and now I'm at 320. Yes, I have a stand. Red Havens. Red Havens usually come in the first week of August. I tell people that are going to wait till at least Red Haven, because from Red Haven on, everything is freestone. But this year is really, really different. Everything's coming in 7 to 10 days early. Red Haven is already come and gone. We should be in the heart of it right now. We're not. What is the best peach? Believe it or not, it changes every year. The first couple years, the first year that we had viable peaches, my wife and I said, oh, this early star, that's got to be the best peach of the whole year. So we couldn't wait for it the next year, and the next year wasn't as good, and maybe Red Haven was the best that year. And maybe the next year, Glowing Star was the best, and then the next year, Contender was best. And then finally sunk in, oh, I get it. It all depends on the temperature and the humidity and the moisture during the season. Probably the previous 2 weeks of when you harvest that variety. Believe me, Red Haven is, 1 year Red Haven, we had a lot of rain before Red Haven, and I had to put a note on my counter that said, we apologize for the flavor, but trust us, these are Red Haven, but they're not up to par, because we'd had a lot of rain. So yeah, come and visit, but if you come and visit, it better be in the next week or 10 days, because I usually make it to Labor Day, and I discovered last night, I pick every night till, well, some nights with a flashlight. I go so long. I discovered last night, and I talked to Dave Howell, and that we're running a week to 10, maybe 14 days early. And instead of making it to Labor Day, I'm hoping to make it till next Sunday. I'm picking some of the last variety of the year right now. they'll probably last another, well, who knows? Depends on. More questions? Yes?
I just wanted to say to this man's question about the cherries, Bellevue was the big cherry producer. And if you contact the Historical Society, I can't remember what happened, but if you come, like I come from Columbus, I come back way, all where the solar fields, that's where the cherry fields were. Yeah.
Nice.
And then I had a question. What do you do with your peaches besides sell them at stands? Do you sell them to canners or something?
My business has grown so much that I was just mentioning to my wife this morning that, do you remember a couple years ago when we used to be able to read a book while we were waiting for a customer? And now we're 2 full-time people as fast as we can work to sell every peach I can ever grow. And I could probably supplement it with many more. So and people ask me about seconds, the ones that they used to call probably number twos, and they could still get $1 a bushel for them. Some of you may know of, I found a friend who was a retired chef who came up with a recipe for a peach muffin that we now call as the world's best peach muffin. And if I told you how many of those we sold a year using our seconds, our peaches, you wouldn't believe it. So, so I don't sell seconds, which you don't. Yes?
I was just going to make a comment when you were saying Georgia's moving out of the peach business. I don't know if anybody around here did. I have a place in Georgia, so I'm there every year. And there was a big thing called the peach truck. Anybody ever?
Oh, it's up here too. Yeah.
Here too. And so I even got peppered with emails, and I was wondering what's going on. So I wondered.
Well, you know, I suppose the debate is how much of this is climate related or climate change related.
We've had terrible rain in Georgia.
Yeah.
I mean, not just what's outside now. We've had very wet June, July, May.
Yeah. I think they're finding, or maybe just scientifically, they're just finally figuring out that this is really better for blueberries than it is for peaches. And the Carolinas are finding out, you know, maybe our climate is just this much different than Georgia's, and it's better for peaches. I can't answer it, but do you agree that it seems that there are less orchards? Yeah. Yeah.
And we still say that Red Havens are better than Georgia.
I appreciate that. I shouldn't even bust that bubble because I have more Red Haven trees than any other tree in my orchard.
And people will bring us peaches, you know, and we'll like taste them and say, this is not organic.
Yeah. If you, this year in particular, if you'd have picked any peach that I had all year long, I believe you would have said it's better than a Georgia peach.
And I just want to say the peach muffins are great. I make good muffins.
What?
They are great.
Thank you. Yeah, right here.
Do I understand correctly that nectarines are a combination of the peach and the plum? And do you have nectarines? I don't know. I know that some people close by have some.
I missed the first part, but you said, do I have?
Nectarines.
I had nectarines for a little while. I got away from them. The question is, are nectarines the same as, or how are they different?
Combination of peach and plum. I understand that they were.
No, I don't think that could be how they came up with it, but there are pullets and there are all sorts of other combinations of. Nectarine is genetically identical to a peach, except with one exception, and that is the skin. Other than the skin, a nectarine is genetically identical. I find them very difficult to grow and sell because it's very difficult to tell when a nectarine is ripe. Its color is the ones I grew were pure red, and the skin is tough. All right, it's got an apple skin on it. So if you give it a really, really light squeeze, you can't tell if it's ripe or not. And with my peaches, I can. My wife and I are so damn good. It's carefully squeezing a peach on the top, not on the sides, to tell when it's going to be a leaner. But a nectarine, I couldn't do it. And I couldn't tell. And bruises is another one. It's got a tough skin, so it could be really soft in some area where a tree banged against, branch banged against it or something, And you can't tell. And now I'm going to sell you something, and you bite into it, and it's got really mushy on one's area. So I kind of did away with it. White peaches is another one. White peach, you all know about white peaches? Either you love white peaches or you don't. And I'm one of those don't, from the farmer's point of view, because they are so fragile. They are so fragile. I went out 10 days ago, and I carefully picked white peaches, because I have about a half a dozen trees. And I carefully put them in a padded cart, and I carefully carried them up to the front. And the next day I was going to be so proud. I opened up, I was going to sell white peaches, and 50% of these peaches were showing bruising. They are so fragile. I said, you know what? So people come in, I say, all right, I'll go out and pick you some, but if all my white peach trees died, I wouldn't lose any sleep. Yes? What are white peaches used for? I don't know. Mostly eating. Because to me, a white peach is much sweeter than a peach. It's like sugar, but it's less peachy than a peach. For those of you who know white peaches, is that fairly accurate? I mean, it is super sweet, but it doesn't have as strong of a peach flavor. So there are people that just love that extra sweetness. White peach used to be almost as popular as yellow peaches, not necessarily here, but throughout the country and in Europe. White peach was a big deal. Yes?
Let's say a peach. I wanted to buy a peach. How much would you say?
Are you ready? You are sitting down, right? It's amazing. Although I can beat the price of the peach truck with fresh peaches. People, I feel guilty charging what I charge until I hear what the peach truck gets, and people line up and sign up 3 months in advance to pay 50% more than what I'm charging. I'm getting $6 for a heaping quart, which generally is 6 peaches or 5 if they're much bigger. I'm getting $24 for a peck, which is about 30 peaches. So I'm getting anywhere from 75 cents to $1 a peach. When I started, it was probably closer to 70 cents a peach, or 60 cents. But I'm embarrassed to do it, but believe me, I don't make a living. I don't make a living at it either. I do it because I had a grocery store chain 2 years in a row come to me and say, "I'll buy every peach you grow." And I said, "I don't want to do that." He said, "Why not?" I said, "We enjoy the people that we meet more than the money we make." And I said, "If I sell you every peach I grow, I couldn't meet all these wonderful people. We have a blast out there. I have so many tangents. We have a little peach elf door on the side of our building. If a kid comes, we have them come over and show them where the peach elves live, and that they come out at night and they help us grow our peach trees, right? And the kids, their eyes get so big. And then the peach elves left them a magic wishing stone, and they get to take this stone home. It's one of these plastic ones that glows in the dark, and you make a wish, and you go in a really dark room, and if the wishing stone is glowing in the dark, that means the peach elves are working their magic to make your wish come true. And we have kids that come back every year, and they zoom right over to that door. I mean, there was a 4-year-old in this year that was 3 years old last year, and he told his mom, "We got to go see the peach elves," right? There's 2 stories. God, I hope my wife's going to kill me because I'm staying so long. 2 stories on the peach elves. One of them, a grandmother brought her grandson last year to get and he took a wishing stone, and he was like 6 years old, and he was on the Pee Wee soccer team, and he wished that he's the goalkeeper. He wished he had a goalie jersey. That's what his wish was. So Grandma came by last week, and she said, "He's coming to visit, and I have this little gift bag here, and it's got a goalie jersey in it. And on the side it says, to Jack from the Peach Elves. And can I put it here?" So we put it, yeah. So Jack came running up, and there was his goalie jersey in this bag. It's pretty cool. And the other one's really going to get me because this one was outdone. Just a couple days ago, a grandmother told me the story that she had brought her grandson to meet the peach elves. They got a wishing stone. He went home. He made a wish. And the next night at dinner, the whole family, they were having a family reunion of some sort. And they said, all right, who wants to say what they're thankful for? Or who wants to say a prayer? And this little 5-year-old says, I just want to thank Brad and the Peach Elves because my wish was to have both my grandmas here, and they're here right now. And she said, they're all crying and stuff, which gets me too. So anyway, more questions. Happier. Yes?
Does Bergman's have their own orchard?
Bergman's do have their own orchard. Dan Bergman is a very good friend of mine. In fact, I'll be playing Texas Hold'em with him tonight at his place. However, Dan has gotten so large and is having such difficulty getting migrant workers to help work his orchards that I don't think he would disagree with it. The vast majority of what Bergman sells at Bergman's Orchard is bought and sold. But he's really good at what he does. I mean, he's canvassing where he can get good stuff. He's going to get good stuff whenever he can. He's good at it. But I don't think, I'm sure he doesn't. If he had 50 bushel of peaches this year off of his own trees, I'd be amazed. I know his lead migrant guy got cancer this year and didn't bring his crew up, and he can't get people to work at his store either. I mean, they've cut their hours back. In fact, he had a sign up 3 weeks ago that said, now hiring people who show up. Yeah. And his wife made him take the sign down. Yes. I suspect that they're slowly diminishing, probably not being sprayed. Believe it or not, we have to spray. They're probably not being cultivated. They're probably not. All right, real quickly, I have 320 trees. I spend the entire month of March pruning trees. It takes me a month at about 20 minutes a tree to cut the limbs in a proper way for a tree to grow right. I spend the entire month of April thinning peaches, which means if I had a branch this long on a peach tree, peaches come on like grape clusters. This branch would probably have 40 peaches on it. And I will spend 20, 30 minutes per tree twisting off almost 1,000 peaches off of every tree. They should be 5 to 6 inches apart. Instead of 30, there should be 3 on this branch. And that way, ensure I get a nice big peach that's not against each other so that the insects get between. It will be sweeter because it has more input from the chlorophyll and the stuff that goes into it and stuff. So he just doesn't have the labor to keep up. And I think he still probably keeps up with his apples because they're a little bit easier to tend to. I think he'll probably hundreds and hundreds of bushels of apples for Bergman's. Yes? I'll repeat it. You don't. Okay.
I just want to say we met you when you first started. And we've been at your peach festivals.
My peach festival, yeah.
Still do that?
No, I used to do a peach and wine festival in the orchard. I wanted people to come and enjoy, be right in the orchard. I had live music and a winery that came in and sold wine. By the way, there is a Swan Orchards peach wine now. You can get it at Bassett's and another place, which I don't profit from a single penny. But I talked Claudio Salvador from Firelands Winery into making a peach wine, which he resented because he's from Italy, and you don't make wine out of anything but grapes. But after a bunch of years, I got him, and it's very good. I don't do the festival anymore because I've gotten to I was doing 90% of the work to prepare for it, and I'm too old, and I can't get any help. I was putting up 6 20 by 40 foot canopies and heavy tables, so we gave it up. So,
well, I just want to add, in addition to the peaches, I can see how passionate you are about this history, which is wonderful. What a great job.
Thank you.
I don't know how you had time to do all that research while you're growing peaches.
Well, March, April, May, June, July, August. That leaves me September, October, November, December, January, February.
So you don't do anything with the peaches during the winter.
I'm sorry?
You don't do anything with the peaches during the
The only thing I do in the fall is I put an electric fence around my entire orchard to try and keep the deer out, because the deer will come and scrape up the sides of your trees, especially the young trees. One year I planted 50 new trees, and they scraped up like 38 of them, and it kills them. So now I've put an electric. That's another story. I tried 5 different methods to keep deer out, and finally came down to electric fence. That wasn't good enough. They learned how to just jump over the fence. So now I have an electric fence here and a twine up at about 7 feet that hopefully they'll think is an electric fence, and that's helped a lot. But I still lose 4, 5, 6 trees a year to deer. Other yes.
I just wanted to say thank you again. I loved your speech. I learned a lot, and I love your enthusiasm. It was just a wonderful little treat in the day.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. With that being said, I know some of you got to get on to other things. I have a lot of pictures here. You're welcome to come up. I can answer individual questions, but let's open the gates and let you escape for those of you who would want to get out of here. And I'll hang around for a little bit. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.